Legend has it that when children die these days, they enter the last game they played. But our protagonist thought it was complete nonsense. She thought it was a lame joke, but when a speeding car sent her flying, those were the first words that came to her mind. Now she knew exactly how she was going to die. Her cracked phone screen lit up, displaying the game's logo. Before the fatal accident, she tried everything to beat this game, but her princess character always died. The game's premise was simple: survive as the tyrant emperor's daughter. But the little princess always died in the most ridiculous ways, driving our protagonist crazy. She couldn't understand who came up with the drink water and die ending. No matter how many times she tried, the ending was always the same. After countless arduous days, she finally reached her character's 18th birthday celebration. Now she could finally see the ending of this darn game. She couldn't wait to see what epic finale the developers had prepared, but the screen only displayed "Thanks for playing." That was it. No fancy cutscenes or anything. The protagonist threw her phone with all her might. She thought maybe the true ending would appear in a second playthrough, so she tried again. Not only the princess's mother, but they even drew the tyrant father as a drop-dead, gorgeous man. Only the illustrations saved the game. That's why she was convinced this darn game must have a true ending. She had to see that ending, but now she was lying on her back on the cold asphalt, bleeding. A treacherous thought flashed through her mind. The last game children play before they die, they enter that game. The next second, she knew. When she opened her eyes again, she found herself in a child's body. She thought she was in heaven. A gentle female voice said they finally met after 9 months. The voice radiated kindness and was full of love. It turned out this impossibly beautiful angel, who named her daughter Tatiana, was her mother. The woman kissed the baby's forehead, calling her beautiful. The protagonist was ecstatic about this unbelievable reincarnation. If her mom was a stunning beauty, then the protagonist would grow up to be just like her. This filled her with joy. But Tanya was the spitting image of her father. Then there was a knock at the door. A blonde, jaw-droppingly handsome man walked through the doorway. The protagonist's mother called him Rahim. He had mesmerizing pink eyes. He immediately asked the maids, "Is Sisera all right?" They needed to be prepared for any complications. The servants bowed and congratulated the emperor. The empress had given birth to a healthy princess. The protagonist couldn't comprehend that this man, the emperor, in fact, was her father. Sisera tried to reassure her husband, saying she was fine. She asked Rahim to greet Tanya. The protagonist stared at the man, feeling like she'd seen him 1,000 times. Suddenly, Rahim said, "She's too small. She doesn't look like my child." Tanya frowned, thinking that maybe all beautiful people had terrible personalities. But if the protagonist had that mom, maybe the dad was bearable. The man told his wife that if their daughter survived, she would be the heir. If not, then it was fate. But Sisera pleaded with her husband to take a look, saying the little one was adorable and looked just like him. Tanya had the same long blonde hair and those bright pink eyes. The emperor was famous for those eyes. They looked like blooming cherry blossoms, vivid and full of life. Sisera took her husband's finger and pressed it against the baby's cheek. The child was too small. They had to be strong parents and raise her to be strong. Rahim gave her a warm smile, vowing they would. Suddenly, black vines began to spread around Sisera. The nanny immediately picked up the baby, and the servants rushed to save the empress, but it was already too late. At that moment, the whole game began. Years ago, Queen Patona cursed the ruthless conqueror who took her kingdom. Fate decreed that love would find Rahim himself, but because of this, he would spend his life in pain, his beloved destined to sleep forever. The system warned Tanya that her heart rate was accelerating. It turned out she wasn't reincarnated, but had entered the princess's body. Now this terrifying man was her father. Her heart was still racing, and the protagonist didn't know what to do. Her thoughts were a mess. She didn't want to die as soon as she was born. To survive, the baby reached out to the skill shop, but the system said the skill purchase function wasn't available yet. The protagonist thought it was complete bullshit. No one told Tanya her father's face would be so bloodthirsty. The system offered to consume 1 health point to activate the passive skill blood of Azteca. The baby didn't hesitate and immediately agreed. The blooming cherry blossom empire greeted the player, explaining that the skill had a slight resistance to the emperor's charm, and the baby's heartbeat slowly stabilized. The darkness dispersed, and she could finally see her father's face etched with confusion and worry. Rahim asked the nursemaid why the princess was crying, and she said the baby was just startled by a stranger. The emperor's eyes widened. The woman knelt, tried to explain that no child in the world could live without a parent's love, so she begged His Majesty to visit the palace more often. Tanya wondered if the nannies in the game were all like this. The emperor said nothing and left the room. The atmosphere was strange, but the protagonist knew most fathers were the same. She had survived her previous life by not having high expectations. The protagonist was frustrated that she ended up in a bad game, but now she had a plan: play and win. You could earn points and unlock skills, so it was much more interesting than ordinary life, but she couldn't purchase skills yet. This made Tanya start to doubt whether she could survive in this world. When Queen Patona cursed the emperor, he just scoffed and asked what the curse actually did. The woman explained that when the man reunited with his beloved, his happiness would be beyond words, but at the peak of his joy, he would fall into the depths of sorrow. Ultimately, he would spend his long life in despair. Within a few days, the protagonist gained 4 more life points, and she was thrilled. If she accumulated enough points in the first year before the main game started, things would be much easier later. Tanya yearned to acquire those skills as soon as possible. She was starting to get bored with this dull world she was trapped in. The little one started fussing, so the nanny picked her up, thinking the princess just had a nightmare. Jenna thought so too. Maybe the little one was just hungry. One of the maids was heartbroken that the emperor hadn't visited his daughter at all, even though the little princess was supposed to be cherished. The nanny shushed them and handed the baby a snack, warning everyone not to say such things around the princess. Tanya gobbled down her food. Jenna hurried to tell the little one that the emperor and empress were just too busy with important matters and couldn't come right now. It seemed the nanny knew nothing about it. Every night, the emperor would sneak in to see his daughter. Every time, the protagonist was startled. The guy moved like a professional assassin. But eventually, she would calm herself down. The little girl had never smiled at her father once. As she recalled the nanny's plea to the emperor, her eyes widened, and she finally understood why he kept sneaking in. Rahim couldn't figure out what he was trying to do, as his daughter didn't resemble Sisera at all. But the whole time, the emperor's eyes were filled with sorrow. Tanya decided to give him a break. After all, this was her second life, and immediately smiled. The man reached out to touch his child, but just then, he heard the nanny stir nearby. Gina woke up, sleepy-eyed, and asked the princess, "Are you awake?" But there was no one by Tanya's crib. It seemed the emperor didn't know what to do either. A few days passed in this new world. A group of maids surrounded the princess's crib, watching her with delight. Tanya was attempting to roll over for the first time. The girls all believed in her and cheered her on. After some effort, our protagonist finally succeeded, sending the maids and nanny into raptures. They were already calling the little one a genius, even though her body was still that of a baby. Tanya felt a little embarrassed as they fussed over her eating habits and called her a genius for basic movements. The nanny praised the princess again, saying that if the empress were still alive, she would have been thrilled. She would say something happy first, then bring up something sad. Whenever Tanya forced a smile, Jenna would assure the little one that when the emperor saw how strong his daughter had become, he would be incredibly proud of her. There had been a lot of talk in the Aztec palace recently. Rumors that His Majesty was preparing for war, ready to use force to break Patona's curse. According to the game's lore, the decline of the Aztec Empire would begin with this war. The emperor made too many enemies, so much so that his daughter eventually faced countless assassination attempts and poisoning. It was exciting in the game, but not so fun to experience firsthand. Before, the protagonist had pressed skip, missing the character's true feelings for her parents. But now she vowed to live until she was 18. Tanya was ready to give it her all, holding nothing back. If she succeeded, maybe she could save her mother. So now she needed to eat more, grow up quickly, make her plan work, and beat this game. One morning, she heard a melody. Tanya wondered, was today really the day her music lessons began? Seeing the sight before her, her eyes immediately lit up. A game icon floated overhead, offering a start option. Her childhood was about to end, and Tanya decided to jump right in. But what happened next was completely unexpected. She kept trying to figure out who she was and where she was. The protagonist thought the game would officially begin, allowing her to do quests and level up. However, the soul of her grandfather, a master of swordsmanship and magic, appeared before her. For Tanya, this game was utterly baffling. The tutorial had mentioned this ancestor, but there had been a skip button. The elder grinned, telling the protagonist that nothing is eternal, nothing is perfect and pride comes before a fall. They teleported to a fiery place, but the flames didn't burn. Even though it was virtual reality, everything looked incredibly realistic. The protagonist's grandfather had learned of a prophecy about the Astic family, that the world would become exceptionally cruel and difficult for a child, and so he made a difficult decision. The old man planned to leave a skill book for the child of prophecy. That book contained all the knowledge of the Astic family. The protagonist was thrilled, finally able to get the skill book. She could finally use her life points, but the book wouldn't let her touch it. So the girl started throwing a tantrum. The old man smiled warmly and decided to give her a crash course on how to unlock the book. The system popped up, instructing her to turn left and right to examine the entire scene. She hated these in-game tutorials more than anything. Now she had to switch to fast mode, and even the old man was stunned to see her going all out. She was determined to get the skill book, so she completed each training task with maximum intensity so she could play freely afterward without any obstacles. The old man gave her a thumbs up, calling her the true heir of the family. Now he was ready to test the princess, not even giving her a chance to breathe. No mercy, no cool down, straight into the challenge. Right now, Tanya needed to try walking around the room, but she hadn't left her crib even once. The nanny had been dozing, but this broken game was forcing a baby who had just learned to roll over to move. She had to complete the task, so the little one started crying. Jenna woke up immediately and rushed to the princess's crib, thinking she just wanted a snack. Tanya wanted the nanny to put her down, but she could only make simple sounds. The nanny paused, then realized that Her Highness wanted to sit on the floor. This woman was clearly the best of them all. Jenna placed the princess in the middle of the room. Tanya put her hands on the floor, completely baffled as to why her small body felt so heavy. She had to stand up to get the skill book. The door suddenly opened, and His Majesty the Emperor appeared. His sudden visit to his daughter in broad daylight surprised everyone. Tanya immediately assumed he was there to scold her again. It turned out Rahim had sensed the magical energy fluctuations here. The system told the little girl that her destination had been set and she could now walk towards Emperor Rahim. The nanny explained that they had decided to play on the floor, but this didn't move the man. He turned and left. The protagonist couldn't just let it go. Determined to complete the task, she crawled towards him, enduring the intense pain. Finally, she grabbed his pant leg. The nanny's face beamed with pride. Her little princess had crawled to the emperor, all by herself. This was pure torture for our protagonist. She wanted to see how Rahim would react. The system congratulated Tanya on obtaining the Astic royal heirloom, the princess's diary. Now she could finally purchase it. The little girl let go of the emperor's hand. He was no longer of use, but it was too late. As soon as she let go, she realized her legs couldn't support her body. She started to fall backward, and Rahim caught her just in time. Rahim was completely captivated by his new bride. His only child meant nothing to him. Just like in a game, he unexpectedly dropped the little girl on the floor. This clearly hurt Tanya, proving her father was still the same jerk. He left his child there and walked away, a perfectly normal action for a heartless man. But now, Tanya had the princess's diary. From this moment on, she would be in control of this game. The protagonist gurgled happily in her crib, while the maids thought she was just in a good mood. Perhaps she was happy about the emperor's visit. She immediately opened the book, greeted the princess, and asked which skill she needed to look for. Tanya was certain she was going to dominate this game. First, she typed meteor skill into the search bar. This skill was designed to fight a raging dragon and played a key role in destroying the dragon's demonic army. It seemed the old man's dragon-slaying stories weren't made up. Tanya not only checked the skill's effects, but also saw the creator information listed. The book was a family heirloom, recording the entire family bloodline. The stronger the skill, the more health points it consumed when used. Now Tanya needed to find a skill that prevented instant death, so her father couldn't scare her anymore. First, the princess chose the courage skill, so her heart could handle any difficult situation. However, the visual effect was too intense, and Tanya started crying. The nanny thought the princess just liked the toy. The problem wasn't the toy at all, but Tanya was elated. She had just unlocked a new skill. The maids immediately took action, determined to make the best toy in the world. Suddenly, Jenna, the nanny, told everyone to pay attention. She wanted to talk about more than just toys. Jenna picked up the little princess and said her birthday was coming soon, and there were many things to prepare. Tanya remembered what had happened an hour ago. That jerk had just thrown her on the floor. The emperor turned and walked towards the door. But Jenna immediately shouted, "The princess will be 1 year old soon. We need to hold a banquet." Tanya was terrified. This topic was Rahim's biggest taboo. On that day, the empress had been cursed. Jenna quickly apologized to His Majesty for her sudden interruption. The nanny was trembling with fear, but she still told the emperor that if he missed this event, he would never be able to face the empress. After that, Tanya also started trembling. Most importantly, Princess Tanya was a member of the royal family, the only heir to the Astic family. She had the right to host a birthday celebration. Just then, the emperor glanced coldly at the nanny. Tanya could feel the emperor's pressure, so intense that it even affected her newly acquired passive skill. Unexpectedly, he agreed to the nanny's suggestion. Rahim thought if this was all he had to do, he didn't object, but the nanny had to handle all the arrangements. Jenna assured him she would do everything to make the celebration fit for royalty. Tanya's gaze met the emperor's, and then Rahim turned and strode towards the door. The emperor's words still echoed in Tanya's mind. She didn't understand why he had that expression, as if he felt some kind of guilt towards her. The nanny decided the best course of action was to choose a dress that matched the princess's eye color, but she wasn't sure if the fabric would be up to par. Tanya put all her effort into it. The choice had to be perfect, as a stunning look was crucial. Tanya checked her dress color chart. She chose white. The nanny and the maids noticed and nodded at her. White didn't clash with her hair and eye color, so it was a good choice. Tanya hadn't done anything, but the compliments were already piling up. There were only 15 days left until the banquet, so Jenna loudly ordered that nothing could go wrong. Time flew by, and her birthday arrived in a blink of an eye. Tanya looked adorable in her white dress. Tanya behaved exceptionally well, simply leisurely enjoying the compliment from the nanny and maids. Jenna reminded the princess that there was good news. The emperor had just returned to the palace, possibly specifically to wish her a happy birthday. It turned out Rahim had rushed to the battlefield immediately after approving the celebration. However, it would have been nice if the empress could have seen this. Sisera had been asleep for a whole year. Tanya had to break that curse as soon as possible. She could barely remember her mother's face. All she could see in the mirror now was Rahim's face. The emperor entered the room. As the man looked at his child, Tanya's courage skill immediately activated, so she wasn't afraid. Tanya understood the servant's reactions. She could physically feel her father's presence, but now the situation was completely different. She was no longer afraid. Tanya smiled triumphantly, trying to show her father that she wasn't scared of him. The emperor had come to bestow upon his daughter the Astic family rights she deserved, but somehow he looked more haggard than last time and unusually sad. Even his body seemed exhausted. Perhaps that was why his aura posed no threat to Tanya. The emperor was about to leave, but Tanya immediately called out to him, "Papa." Her pronunciation was very clear. At that moment, tears of joy welled up in the nanny's eyes. She congratulated His Majesty. The princess had called him Papa for the first time, but Rahim simply said she had finally spoken clearly for the first time. He suddenly asked her if she really meant it when she called him Papa. Tanya was taken aback by the question, wondering if her father didn't want to be called that. But a look of sadness appeared on the emperor's face. Since this was Tanya's second life, she decided to give the emperor some leeway and called him father again. Tanya prayed internally for her father to wait until she lifted the empress's curse and got her proper revenge. Even though the protagonist had said she would punish Rahim for his actions, she now froze in place. For some reason, his character's aura had shifted drastically. It was strange. The protagonist recalled what had happened earlier. 20 minutes ago, when she had called him Papa again, the man hadn't reacted at all. The potential tyrant hadn't even flinched at the child's smile. Rahim, thinking her tone meant she wanted to be picked up, grabbed Tanya's coat and lifted her into the air, causing the little girl to start flailing. She hadn't struggled to call out Papa for this. The emperor, not understanding why Tanya was squirming, had Yana explain that she needed to be held with her back supported. Rahim followed the advice. The protagonist didn't understand why he was staring at her, as if they were in a staring contest. Throughout her gaming career, she had never backed down from player versus player, so she wasn't about to back down now. Her father's eyes were truly captivating. An attendant informed His Majesty that the princess's birthday banquet was about to begin, so they had to hurry. Tanya declared it a draw. The protagonist suddenly realized that her father's tall stature had put her quite high above the ground. Yana tried to take the princess, but the child was clinging tightly to her father. The nanny blushed, then asked His Majesty if he would be willing to hold the princess himself. The protagonist froze, but the emperor nodded, and they headed towards the banquet hall. The scene made Tanya nervous, praying that her father wouldn't drop her midair. The emperor raised an eyebrow. Why are you holding on so tight? Yana guessed that the princess was simply excited. Wrong. The protagonist was terrified. As they entered, the musicians began to play. Then came the grand announcement. The emperor and the princess arrive. The protagonist's eyes widened. Thousands of people were out to stare at her. Tanya noticed another throne beside the emperor's throne. That must be hers. Now the emperor could put her down. She was clearly uncomfortable, but he walked right past it. Both Yana and the butler were stunned. They hadn't expected the princess and the emperor to become so close. In front of all the guests, Rahim declared Tanya a stick as his daughter. Everyone looked thrilled. For these people, the anniversary of the Empress's curse was more important than the princess's first birthday. Rahim asked for confirmation again if she was his daughter. Even though it felt a little awkward, it solidified his position. When the princess clearly called him Papa, all the guests were dumbfounded. A satisfied smile crept onto Rahim's lips. The nobles rushed forward to congratulate the emperor. Our protagonist sighed in relief and smiled. She had succeeded. But even as everyone applauded him, Rahim's expression remained indifferent. So Tanya decided to thank the guest herself and wave happily. The guests were stunned and widened their eyes as the princess made an unexpected move. Touched by the lovely princess's sincerity, they immediately erupted in cheers. Tanya didn't know how to react to their strange response. The guests kept complimenting the princess's beauty. Suddenly, the emperor told his daughter not to smile at everyone. A flashback of past events hit Tanya hard. She realized she couldn't die over a simple smile. It was best to hold back. The attendant asked if they could begin the divine energy selection ceremony. His Majesty permitted it. The protagonist received this important task. 7 orbs contained divine energy that could help the princess, but it might not even be activated. The Magic Tower Master told the princess she had to choose her divine power. The orbs immediately flew above Tanya's head and started rotating frantically. The emperor told his daughter to choose the one she liked. This first quest happened at the end of the tutorial, kind of like a child's first birthday party. But there was a catch. Some orbs were defective, and if Tanya chose the wrong one, she wouldn't be acknowledged as the heir. The Tower Master asked which orb caught her attention, but the protagonist already had a plan. Now, she could use her life points to get a super useful skill. With it, Tanya could assess the value of any item. She activated it immediately after purchasing the skill. For out of the 7, orbs were defective, so without this skill, the protagonist would be in trouble. She chose the golden orb. It immediately shone with a dazzling light, leaving everyone else present stunned and speechless. The system congratulated the princess on reaching the immortal level and wished for her to awaken her divine energy soon. It turned out Tanya had chosen the best orb out of all of them. The guests immediately erupted in enthusiastic applause. Suddenly, the protagonist felt her father's hand on her head. She was completely caught off guard by this. This seemed like a sign of approval, but when she saw Rahim's expression, Tanya realized she'd made a terrible mistake. He coldly expressed his hope that the divine power would awaken soon and choose the princess as its master. He clasped the chain onto the bead and then fastened it around Tanya's neck. It was time for the oracle brought by the temple. The emperor coldly asked what the priests, who couldn't even handle a single curse, could show them from now on. 3 guards will monitor the princess. Rahim dismissed this as empty words, but Tanya found it interesting. She didn't remember this part in the game. It might have been skipped. The ceremony was over, and now it was time for the emperor's gifts for the princess's first birthday. Tanya's gaze fell upon the mountains of gift boxes. The emperor hesitated, then muttered that perhaps it wasn't enough. There were rattles made of spirit stones, and even a tiara studded with pink diamonds and rare jewels. But Tanya thought the pile of gifts was excessive. The steward suddenly announced in a loud voice that a commemorative coin had just been issued in honor of the princess. The guests erupted in excited chatter. The baby was bathed in praise, but Tanya felt the weight of humiliation. Although the emperor was clearly displeased, he decided to distribute the commemorative coins to every guest at the princess's party. Her mother's face flashed through Tanya's mind, and now she finally understood how much she missed her. Exhausted from the festivities, the princess fainted in the emperor's arms. Since only the banquet remained, the royal family didn't have to stay any longer, so Tanya would likely be taken away. In her sleep, the child softly called out for her mother. The nanny's eyes instantly filled with tears, and she held the princess tightly in her arms. After the party, Empress Sisera slept soundly beneath the palace dome. Rahim decided to check on her and tell her about the child's first birthday. It was the first time she called him Papa, and the guy seemed to love it. But the emperor wondered if he had the right to feel happy when his beloved was trapped here alone. It was Rahim who had driven Sarah to the brink of this breakdown. A full moon rose over the imperial palace. The emperor shoved the woman hard, and she fell to the floor, hitting her shoulder. She winced in pain. Rahim's voice rang out coldly. "Who allowed you to barge into the emperor's bedroom?" She immediately scrambled to beg his majesty for forgiveness. The woman trembled as she tried to explain that she had only been ordered to warm the emperor's bed. The doors suddenly burst open, and Chancellor Nars walked in, proclaiming how proud he was to have found a woman good enough. The emperor was clearly annoyed, reminding him that he had already told him not to pull these stunts. The chancellor asked if his majesty had truly forgotten life before the empress arrived. Rahim grabbed Nars's throat without hesitation. The emperor lifted him off the ground, roaring, "Shut your mouth." He swore to his chancellor that if he ever dared to pull a stunt like this again, next time he would tear him to shreds. The emperor threw the chancellor to the floor. Nars struggled to his feet, demanding that his majesty face reality. No one could break the curse on the empress. Rahim thought his chancellor was tired of living, but the subordinate urged him to look at the empire's army, who were now doing nothing but try to lift that curse. But the emperor insisted he had every right to command that army. But Nars shouted that they were rampaging through the empire, torturing the people of Patona, and it would never end. Breaking that curse was impossible. The emperor might not realize how much the public hated him. The chancellor demanded, "Do you really intend to kill every single person in Patona?" Rahim coldly declared, "If it comes to that, not a single one will be left alive." The subordinate was terrified by his leader's tone and unwavering resolve. He knew perfectly well that at that moment, there was no chance the queen of Patona would ever get to see the emperor. Nars had given everything he had to get this position. When Rahim was still a prince, the Astic royal family was in decline. During his childhood, Nars learned that the dynasty had a glorious tradition, founded by a dragon-slaying hero, but now the nation had no future. As he pondered this, the boy saw Prince Rahim beside him, the perfect candidate for the throne. At that moment, Nars believed it was destiny. As he grew older, Rahim swore to his chancellor that he would build a powerful empire that would go down in history, one where even the sun wouldn't be allowed to set beyond the borders of the Astic Empire. At that moment, Nars thought he could serve this man until his very last breath. He did everything in his power to make Rahim emperor. That was why the chancellor desperately wanted to ask the emperor if his words still held true. Nars pleaded with him to come back. To be the great man he was prepared to serve with unwavering loyalty. But Rahim bluntly stated he couldn't leave Sisera, so the chancellor could leave him. The emperor knew Nars couldn't abandon his leader at a time like this, but Rahim wouldn't listen, turning his back and leaving without a word. The nanny handed the princess a small spoon. Gina's pride was overflowing. Her highness now ate everything and wasn't picky at all. Tanya gobbled down the nutritious baby food. After all, she had to grow up quickly, but the capture points were accumulating too slowly. Tanya started thinking about ways to accumulate points faster. She also had no idea how or when to use the divine orb, which was driving her crazy. Normally, you could figure things out through trial and error, but Tanya wasn't about to gamble with her life. She liked speedrunning games, but there was no guide. This was a real headache. She'd cleared the game, but she didn't know the specifics, so she was completely stuck. No one had mentioned she'd be thrown directly into the game. Just then, Tanya suddenly remembered she had the diary, but the skills would only appear after the divine orb seal was released. The nanny told the princess they were going to play a tactile game today, one her highness always enjoyed. Suddenly, the divine orb moved. It quickly zipped over to Tanya, who had frozen in place. Tanya thought, "This orb seems to follow its owner." Gina believed the orb had recognized the princess as its master. She explained that his majesty had imbued his sword with divine power, so it was intriguing to see how her highness would utilize it. But even without divine power, the emperor was a legendary warrior. These words implied the orb could enhance an object, so perhaps it could be combined with a specific item. Gina asked what she felt in the sand. Tanya wanted to ask about the enhancement, but the forced silence prevented her from speaking. Having no other choice, Tanya waited patiently. She started building things in the sandbox. Gina looked away for a moment, and when she looked back at the princess's creation, she was completely stunned. She couldn't understand how such a small child could build a complete castle. The nanny told the chancellor, "There's no doubt our princess is a genius. Her Highness urgently needs an excellent tutor, so we must inform His Majesty immediately." Gina couldn't ignore the princess's talent. These words piqued Nars's interest. Now Tanya finally understood why the nanny had rushed out of her room in a panic. She knew the smart thing to do would have been to barely complete the tasks, so they wouldn't bother her again. But Tanya had to deal with these rigged games, and there was nothing she could do about it. She was determined not to throw the game. So she started perfectly completing every task the adults gave her. They couldn't believe it. They witnessed firsthand that the princess was a complete genius, beautifully accomplishing all their assigned tasks. She gave it her all, holding nothing back. This strangely made her feel nostalgic, as if transported back to her distant childhood. Suddenly, the chancellor dropped a bombshell. Her Highness could begin training as the imperial heir immediately. Training usually began at age 4, but wasting such talent was absolutely unacceptable. The princess needed to level up quickly. Apparently, the adults wanted to force a 1-year-old to go to school. The chancellor foresaw the birth of the next ruler, unable to believe he was witnessing it firsthand. Given the circumstances, Nars wasn't opposed to being the tutor. His eyes gleamed like someone who'd struck gold in a coal mine. Tanya didn't understand why training was the game's reward. Tanya realized she needed to act like a 1-year-old baby. She decided to pretend she'd never seen a monocle before and snatched it. Then she stuffed it in her mouth and started drooling. She tried to act like a normal child, hoping Nars would eventually give up on her. But the chancellor chuckled triumphantly, saying the princess had grasped the enemy's weakness and delivered a fatal blow. Tanya hadn't expected this reaction at all. In Nars's eyes, a great ruler needed both intellect and battle skills. Tanya initiated Plan B, throwing the monocle across the room. But the chancellor just shrugged. "Your Highness, you can throw it 100 times if you wish." But Tanya didn't want to. Nars had plenty of money, so he could provide her Highness with as many monocles as she wanted. He saw this as a small test of her loyalty. This growth-type training mission was a complete disaster. Before beginning training to become a qualified heir, she needed to master some basic academics. Sudden death was too advanced a lesson for the heir. Tanya had triggered the sudden death scenario by overleveling. Her HP was at rock bottom, and death was imminent. The regular curriculum was decided by a group of 15 teachers, but before classes started, the chancellor wanted to get to know the princess better. The lady-in-waiting mentioned that her Highness enjoyed playing, so Nars requested the princess to grace him with her presence in a play session. From that day forward, our heroine experienced a tremendous shock. Nars showed up every day with those educational toys. He was clearly picking out things he knew would appeal to the princess, a skill honed from long experience. So Tanya finally snapped, yelling that she didn't want them anymore. She had dodged the sudden death crisis, but him showing up every day with those blasted toys was just too much. All those childish things had Tanya completely bored. Nars handed her Highness a piece of candy, calling it a reward. That sly bastard was certain a single candy could manipulate our heroine. Tanya didn't even realize her drool was running down her chin. Undeniably, the candy was a devilish creation. The moment it touched the little girl's tongue, her entire mouth was filled with a wild sensation. All thanks to that child-friendly flavor. But Tanya had her pride. She couldn't possibly give in so easily. When the chancellor sensed her Highness's resistance, he pulled out more candies, vowing to give them all to the heroine. It felt like a personal affront, but there were simply too many candies to refuse. Tanya thought to herself that she should seize this rare opportunity. As long as she kept playing along, the fun would return. The princess's mind was beyond her years. She never hesitated to choose the path that achieved her goals. The little one had successfully solved the puzzle once again. But most importantly, she was just too cute. Faced with the doting affection of the chancellor and the nanny, the heroine was both thrilled and completely flustered. But she didn't know what Nars was up to. He usually left after checking her homework. Suddenly, the chancellor began chattering about the princess's after-class activities, especially her walking practice. He shyly asked the lady-in-waiting if he could be present today. The woman gave a warm smile and said she understood perfectly and couldn't stop him. Nars breathed a sigh of relief. They understood each other. The man took the child's hand and started her walking practice. The heroine didn't care who was holding her hand until the Emperor's icy voice suddenly cut through the room. The Emperor stood at the doorway, arms crossed. Tanya was puzzled. He never interfered before, so why was he suddenly here? The Chancellor calmly reminded His Majesty that he had been helping Princess Tanya train to improve her skills, but Rahim believed the heir's curriculum didn't include this kind of hands-on teaching. The Chancellor clarified that this was extra walking practice, and the heroine confirmed it without hesitation. Princess Tanya was very good at hiding her emotions, so much so that even Nars couldn't find enough words to praise her. Suddenly, the Emperor snatched the child's hand. Nars scolded the Emperor, saying that since the princess was already paired with him, the Emperor should wait his turn. But Rahim insisted that it should be the girl's decision. As a result, the heroine was put in a difficult position. Both men wanted to hold her hand, but Tanya knew that being with Nars was the fairest choice. But a system message suddenly flashed before her. The system announced that walking practice with Emperor Rahim would grant 50 HP. She instantly abandoned the Chancellor and switched sides. The little one silently apologized to Nars in her heart, but this game world was just that unfair. Everyone in the room looked at the ruler in bewilderment. The protagonist couldn't understand why Emperor Rahim was acting so strangely. His voice was suddenly filled with tension again, and Tanya thought he had just found a new way to nitpick at her. The nanny told Emperor Rahim he could hold the princess so she wouldn't keep falling and to walk slowly to the door. The Chancellor simply scoffed at his Emperor's pathetic attempts, but Rahim actually listened to the nanny's advice. He gripped the protagonist much tighter than she expected, catching the little one completely off guard. Emperor Rahim usually ignored her, but something was definitely off today. It turned out Tanya was right. Rahim said with a straight face that she finally looked like a real person. Tanya had just completed an unexpected quest, gaining 50 HP. Now she could unlock 2 whole skills. But the protagonist didn't understand why these random quests only appeared when she was near Rahim. She had to find out, even if it was a little embarrassing. The little girl clumsily ran to her father and hugged his leg with all the sincerity she could muster. The protagonist told her father how much she loved him, but the Emperor didn't even blink. Instead, he decided the princess needed to learn a standard operating procedure to understand what was acceptable to love and what wasn't. He assigned this task to his Chancellor. The word stung a little. How dare he make it illegal for her to love him? Tanya decided to complete the quest on her own, wake up the Empress herself, and then take over the entire kingdom. So she wanted to know where her mother slept. The nanny wanted to tell the princess everything, but the Emperor had ordered secrecy. He promised his daughter that he would let her see the Empress before her 10th birthday. But Rahim wasn't playing along at all, so no one could guess what he was planning to do. This fool could never lift the Empress's curse. Before the game ended, those people left, and Tanya pulled the little one close. Time flew by, and the princess, who seemed destined to remain small, began to grow up. She was now a full 3 years old. The maids praised her beauty, saying that if they were the Emperor himself, they would move next door just to gaze at the princess day and night. Tanya grew up day by day, showered with affection, while her father, Rahim, grew increasingly cold and ruthless. One day, a maid offered the princess a sweet, but she found it suspicious and refused. Tanya didn't recognize this woman. She had never seen this maid before and demanded to see her pass on the spot. The maid explained to Her Highness that she was always standing behind her, so she had never noticed. Now, she began to push the candy more insistently. Tanya sternly ordered her not to be so rude and threw the candy back. The woman picked up the candy and forced it into the little girl's mouth. Just then, the golden bead began to glow. The next second, a shockwave hit the maid, sending her flying. The door burst open, and a startled Gina ran in as soon as she heard the strange noise. The nanny's face was as white as a sheet, as she pulled the child tightly into her arms. Tanya cried for her mother again, and the nanny told her that the Empress was still traveling far away, but if the princess wanted to see her mother so badly, it meant she could return at any time. So don't worry. Tanya just shook her head and said, "I know everything. Mother is here right now." The child said it was a dream that her mother had told her in the dream. Then she imitated her mother sleeping in a glass coffin. The nanny's blood ran cold, realizing that someone had told the little princess about this. Tanya cried out in a pitiful tone, "Is it really impossible to see mother, not even father?" Gina said nothing, just pulled the child closer. Tanya's plan had fallen apart. The Chancellor told the Emperor, "This one is dead." Only upon hearing these words did Rahim freeze, staring numbly at the bloody corpse at his feet. No matter how many people he killed, his rage wouldn't subside. Nar suggested visiting the princess, who had just experienced a near-catastrophic event. But the king had ordered the incident to be ignored, so the Chancellor could only pretend it never happened, which annoyed him. To be honest, Rahim didn't understand how the child knew. He still hadn't been able to bring her mother back. Meanwhile, Icold was setting up a protective barrier around the princess's palace. The child mentioned that the divine bead had saved her. The Tower Master thought the divine bead was very fond of her highness. Otherwise, why would it protect her without being awakened? Tanya decided to ask what needed to be done to awaken it. It turned out that the awakening conditions were different for everyone, so they were trying to figure out the specific requirements. Tanya was still lacking some divine favor. Icold suddenly asked the princess if she needed a friend. Tanya guessed he was about to give her a new mission. He said one of his trainees was about the same age as the princess, and perhaps they could become friends. Tanya knew that Icold was a 5-star mage, so she wondered how many stars this friend had. She was determined to find out how powerful this friend really was. The Tower Master knew that adults shouldn't act so childish, but he said it anyway. He had to remain the princess's most powerful mage. So he declared that if he had 5 stars, then that kid only had 1. Icold promised to bring him next time. Now Tanya was determined to meet this guy and have his rank rise along with hers. The Tower Master did this because he knew the little princess was very lonely in the palace. Tanya promised the bead that she would make it grow too. It was time for the heir's lessons. As soon as the nanny brought her into the study, Tanya asked if the teachers had been waiting long. Tanya sat down at her desk and said, "I'm ready." The professor, suppressing a smile, said then, "Let's begin." Tanya was full of fighting spirit. Legend had it that this skill-loaded body was completely invincible. For this lesson, Tanya had just purchased improved concentration, enhanced memory, and a cheating skill. The debate class was like a multiple-choice game. The teachers threw out topics with many right and wrong answers, and Tanya got them all right. Tanya breathed a sigh of relief. It was a simple lesson. All she had to do was figure out the logic and catch the hints. But she knew the teachers hadn't thrown any complex scientific concepts at her yet. After class, Nars gave Princess Tanya a thumbs up, saying she did a great job today. As time went on, she was getting better and better, and the Chancellor could barely contain his laughter. Today, he offered her another handful of candy. Tanya, pouting, complained to Nars, "If I do well, can I have something else?" The man said she could have anything she wanted. Tanya, with a mischievous grin, asked him if he dared to stake his head on that promise. Truly the typical behavior of an emperor's daughter, the blood of a tyrant running true. Tanya announced that she wanted to step outside the palace walls. The Chancellor had expected her to ask for a kingdom, a fortune, or even a few enemies, but this request was so innocent that he laughed and said, "Of course." Tanya's eyes lit up. The palace gates were finally opening. Nars mentioned that today was the day for an audience with His Majesty, the Sword Emperor. He told the princess she would be escorted by Marquis Carmelia. The Chancellor added that it would be good for her husband as well. Tanya froze, shocked to discover her nanny had a husband. They walked outside, and Nars told Princess Tanya to watch closely as the show was about to begin. Tanya immediately spotted her father, perched high on a massive throne. A red-haired man rode a horse towards the throne. Nars explained that this was a victory parade, and the king was now receiving the soldiers who had fought bravely on the battlefield and survived. The princess suddenly noticed a group of children. They were the spoils of war. In the Aztec Empire, there was a system where they would select children from respected families in the colonies and educate them. If they graduated successfully and reached adulthood, they would be sent back to their homelands. It seemed the king was finally ready to end a war, though he was seething with rage at not having received any intelligence. Tanya decided to play dumb, pretending she didn't understand a word. Then, her gaze locked onto one particular child. The black-haired, purple-eyed child was breathtakingly beautiful. Tanya couldn't tear her eyes away from him, her heart skipping a beat. He was exactly her type. Ever since she first went online, Tanya had been chasing after men like him. Now, he was standing right in front of her. The child's beauty was clearly destined to be legendary. For the sake of her future, Tanya was determined to rescue this boy from captivity. But she froze when she heard the clang of metal. Her father had drawn his sword. The Chancellor told the princess to calm down, but Tanya wasn't sure if brandishing swords was normal. Nars explained that they had been dueling with swords since childhood. It was their way of greeting each other. The Emperor told Marquis Carmelia that his swordsmanship was still excellent. Hearing the name, Tanya realized this was Gina's husband, the man Gina gazed at so adoringly. His Majesty asked the Marquis why he hadn't brought what he wanted. The man replied, confused, that he had mentioned it several times in his reports. The Emperor had been waiting for an answer from the man he trusted most. The Marquis asked His Majesty, wasn't this a triumph ceremony? He wondered why he had been summoned, and if he was now actually permitted to return to the palace. The Emperor realized he should have warned his subordinates sooner, but if he had, he wouldn't have brought them here. Marquis Carmelia might be the Emperor's blade, but he was an exceedingly easygoing man. The Emperor ordered his men to hand over the Black Flame rebels from Petona to the insurgents. If they didn't hand over the key to lifting the curse, he would kill one person every week, without exception. The Chancellor gritted his teeth. The Emperor was saying this in front of the princess. Tanya couldn't comprehend that her father planned to slaughter innocent children to save the Empress. Even in the game, it was never mentioned that the Empress had been freed from the curse. This meant that besides those children, the Emperor might sacrifice even more people. Even though the game was crazy, this was insane. Marquis Carmelia snapped at Nars. Did you make the Emperor resort to such cowardly tactics? The Chancellor told the man to keep his voice down. He himself had just found out and only knew that Nars had returned. This was entirely the Emperor's decision. Marquis Carmelia couldn't understand why the Emperor would do this. He had never used children as weapons before. It turned out the Emperor had finally understood the children's value and how to use them to crush his enemies. Marquis Carmelia realized the Emperor had gone mad. The Chancellor shrugged. He just wants the princess to finally meet the Empress. The Marquis, however, was convinced this was a real curse. Even if you turn Petona upside down, the great soul of Petona doesn't exist, so there's no answer. The Marquis slammed his fist on the table. The table split in two. He asked the Chancellor what he intended to do with the children brought as a symbol of friendship. But Nars wasn't sure he could convince His Majesty to change his mind. Just then, the door opened and Gina's voice rang out, warning the princess not to wander off without her. The men were startled. Standing in the doorway was none other than Her Highness. A joyful smile spread across Tanya's face as she immediately greeted the Marquis. Dio Carmelia introduced himself to the princess, remarking on how much she had grown since their last meeting. Tanya had become even more adorable. The princess hesitantly asked the Marquis if he truly knew her. Dio explained that he had met her once when she was a small child. Nars, the Chancellor, suddenly asked her why she was there. The princess replied that she had purposely asked Gina to bring her. At that moment, the Marquis saw his beloved wife after a long separation. Overwhelmed with emotion, he kissed her right then and there. Nars covered the princess's eyes, deeming the scene inappropriate for someone so young. He assumed she had come looking for him simply because she wanted a sweet. But the princess's true purpose wasn't candy. It was something far more important. She told Nars that she really wanted to play with the children. The Chancellor flatly refused, so Tanya used her considerable influence to sway him to her purpose. Nars felt the weight of that influence, but he insisted again that those children were not suitable companions for her. The princess persisted, explaining that she simply wanted to befriend them. Tanya couldn't stop now. She was using all her accumulated life points to save these children. Pouting, she complained of being incredibly bored and lonely. After a moment of thought, Nars realized the princess was at the age where friends began to matter. He promised to find her some well-behaved, respectable friends, but not those children. The princess refused point blank. She specifically wanted those friends because she genuinely liked them. Glaring at the Chancellor, the princess sharply ordered him to bring the children to her. Nars instantly felt the aura of Emperor Rahim. Tanya was actually using the monarch's gaze skill, the one that could cow lesser men. She prayed it would actually work. The princess reasoned that Nars followed the emperor because her father had that special something. She had checked the princess's diary and, sure enough, found her father's skill listed there. So the princess had quickly learned it. But who knew if she could pull it off? Unlike her father, she was just a spoiled brat. Tanya began praying internally for Nars to agree. He knelt on one knee before the heir to the Aztec Empire's throne. As the second most powerful person in the empire, Nars declared that there was nothing in this empire she could not have. The princess's plan had actually worked. Gina shrieked, exclaiming that the chancellor had gone mad. The man retorted, "I am perfectly sane. The sole heir to the empire wishes to befriend them." Tanya immediately embraced Nars tightly. As expected, she had won this gamble. All the children sat in the room, awaiting their fate, homesick and yearning to return. Just then, Tanya approached them, asking their names. In the distant future, there would be a golden angel who would cross the continent, bringing prosperity to the entire world and to Petona. The children of Petona knew this ancient prophecy, but in reality, it was the emperor who crossed the continent and found them, this golden messenger. However, the boy understood everything the moment he saw her, because that girl was the true golden angel. They had brought him here to die anyway, so at least he could see an angel in the end. But now she stood before him, asking his name. The boy hadn't expected her to approach him. He said his name was Knox Dillon. The girl beamed, told him her name, and added that it was nice to meet him. Taking his hand, she suggested they play together so he wouldn't have to sit alone. Knox couldn't understand why anyone could be so kind, considering she was still the daughter of that bloodthirsty golden messenger. Tanya suddenly stopped, looking at his hands, which were covered in scars. The princess immediately demanded to know who dared to hurt such a beautiful boy. For some reason, she assumed it was the Marquis. The Marquis asked her if she really thought he was a bad adult who bullied defenseless children. Knox told the little girl that the scars had been with him for a long time. Then Tanya told Gina they needed to feed all the children first, and the woman agreed to do so immediately. Soon, the table was laden with all sorts of sweets. The princess told the children to let her know if they wanted anything else. The children were thrilled. Everything looked delicious. The princess offered the handsome boy a cookie, urging him to eat something. He took the treat, wondering why she was being so nice to him. A bright smile bloomed on Knox's face the moment he saw the princess. A day passed like that. The next day, many children began to miss their parents, so Tanya promised to send them all home on the third day. Tanya asked Knox to wait a moment, and the boy gave her a warm smile. This angel's kindness seemed to have no end. At first, he was happy to die here, bathed in the grace of this amazing angel, but now she wanted to send him back. Tanya asked Knox to wait a moment, and the boy gave her a warm smile. This angel's kindness seemed to have no end. At first, he was happy to die here, bathed in the grace of this amazing angel, but now she wanted to send him back. Knox decided to ask the princess why she kept calling him handsome. Tanya honestly replied that he was cute and would be even more handsome when he grew up. The boy's cheeks flushed when the princess told him to eat well and grow taller quickly. She unexpectedly handed him a piece of candy. Tanya would usually save such things, but for Knox, she decided to share. It was the first time the boy had received something specifically for him, so naturally he was touched. Tanya gave him another cookie, and his ears turned red. The princess promised Knox that she would punish anyone who bullied him, as long as he told her their names. The boy was happy that someone was finally on his side. He thanked her for her words. Tanya tried to convince Knox that she was serious now because she held the highest rank. He gave her a warm smile. The boy decided to stop wondering why she was being so nice to him. At his age, it was easy to become interested in different people. A week passed, and now the princess was yelling at the children because they didn't understand the empire's official language. Nor could they write. Tanya was very dissatisfied with this. The time had finally come, and the princess immediately summoned Dio Carmelia. She ordered them to take all the children back immediately. Tanya didn't want to see them anymore, so she wanted them to leave the palace as soon as possible. None of them could answer her questions, so Tanya couldn't even play with them. The princess didn't actually feel this way. She just wanted the children to go home. Tanya knew that these children were given to her by her father, so she had every right to dispose of them as she pleased. The chancellor assured the princess that everything would be done according to her wishes. The princess declared, "From today onwards, I will not eat until Uncle Dio sends those children home." She didn't touch her food again. The chancellor ordered the children to be removed from the palace immediately. To be honest, the princess felt a little embarrassed that such a fuss was being made just because she wasn't eating. Nars was furious at the princess for wanting to damage her health. Then, Marquis Carmelia ordered all the children to prepare to move to Petona immediately. No one knew that Nox didn't want to leave. He looked at the princess, and she smiled warmly at him and made a hushing gesture. Now the boy understood that she was doing this deliberately to keep her promise to send the Petona children home. But he worried that the emissaries wouldn't let it go, meaning the princess wasn't safe. The princess was sure she had handled it perfectly. Her actions had definitely caught her father's attention. Now all she had to do was wait for him to come. Only now did the princess finally breathe a sigh of relief. It had been difficult before, and she knew her father had bad feelings towards her. Now Tanya needed to meet Rahim to ascertain the terms of the sudden mission and find out the Empress's whereabouts. In other words, this was called Operation Find My Family. Fortunately, none of Tanya's various sudden deaths were caused by her father's disappointment. The princess's plan worked wonders, and not long after, the Emperor came to see her for the first time in a long time. She finally saw him, but unfortunately, that sudden mission never materialized. The system reminded the princess that the character was using Monarch's gaze. But ever since Tanya had learned to be brave, she was no longer afraid. The Emperor noticed that his daughter had gotten close to the children he had brought from Petona, so he intended to find out why she had sent home the friends she had desperately wanted to keep. Tanya pretended to be indifferent and said they were just bothering her. His Majesty's tone became serious. "Who made you do this? Marquis Carmelia or Chancellor Nars?" Tanya calmly said it was her own decision. She needed to melt Rami's heart. The princess confessed in a trembling voice that she initially thought her father valued those children far more than her. They were gone, and now her father had come to see her. Tanya was lonely, and her father only had eyes for them, so she got angry and sent everyone away. The Emperor was stunned when he heard his daughter's confession. The one who had played the game countless times knew that using skills depended on timing and occasion. So the princess asked her father, "What should I do to make you come see me more often?" Tanya knew that Rami had to do something now. He wouldn't resist his own skills. He was a tyrant, and his daughter, practically his mirror image, was equally impulsive, reckless, and a troublemaker. They wondered if he was ready for a father-daughter talk. Tanya said she was really happy to finally see him. The Emperor's thoughts flashed back to his childhood, when he always asked his father why he never visited him. Now, Rahim realized he was putting his own child through the same pain his father had put him through. So he told Tanya that from now on, if she wanted to see him, she could come at any time. The Emperor placed a hand on her shoulder, adding that he wasn't angry about what she had done. The princess asked if she could do as she pleased with her friends. The man nodded, and a blissful smile bloomed on the little girl's face. The image of Cicera smiling immediately surfaced in Rem's mind. Their smiles looked exactly the same. Tanya declared that Nars was right. There was nothing in this world she couldn't get. Although she was angry with her friends, she still had to make sure they had gotten home safely. The Emperor promised to take care of everything. He picked up his daughter and, in return, asked her not to miss dinner that night. Every servant in the palace witnessed a scene they thought they would never see in their lifetime. For the first time ever, the Emperor had dinner with his daughter, but not a single warm smile could be seen on his face. Gina stepped forward to tell His Majesty that the princess needed to get ready for bed. Rem offered to take her back himself. Hearing this, the princess was stunned. The nanny smiled with relief, thinking that Empress Cicera should also see him like this. The princess had been asleep for hours, but the Emperor stood on the terrace, thinking about how foolish he had been all this time. He was tormented by a question. What would he do if Pitona's curse one day fell upon Tanya? In the end, showing affection was his own selfishness. He knew this in his heart, but once feelings were shown, they couldn't be taken back. The Chancellor and the Marquis approached him. The Emperor sternly asked Nars if he had taught the princess that she could get anything she wanted. The Chancellor nodded, adding that, in fact, she already had everything. Rem called Nars arrogant, and Nars simply thanked him for the compliment. Frankly, the Chancellor hadn't expected the princess to melt the Emperor's cold and, not cruel heart. Dio decided to confirm with His Majesty whether he really intended to send Pitona's children back. The Emperor nodded, kindly asking what else he could do. They were his daughter's friends now. Marquis Carmelia took the order, but first he had something to show his majesty. Only then did the emperor notice that Dio had been holding the black-haired boy. Rahim recognized the child as one of his daughter's friends, but he didn't understand why the child was wearing handcuffs. The Marquis didn't know how to explain this mess without the emperor making things more complicated. He explained that the child was a shadow, and knowing this, they couldn't just send him back. The emperor immediately drew his sword. His subordinates instantly tensed up. Nox froze. For a moment, he thought his majesty was about to cut him down. But Rahim severed the shadow behind the child. Now his majesty was certain. This was the genuine shadow of Petona the Marquis had mentioned. These knights were enforcers overseeing Petona's upper nobility, but Shadow of Petona was just a title. What they truly trained were killing dolls nurtured from the cradle. The black magic flowing through them could turn them into weapons by which enemies would be destroyed. But this child was a discarded defect. The shadows his majesty had seen before had their last shred of emotion stripped away. But this child, he still had some left. Nox told them he was a shadow they were planning to eliminate. He had come to the Aztec Empire seeking death. Dio could only guess that something had gone wrong, causing the child's master to send him straight into the enemy's den. The emperor told the child he would not die. His daughter had ordered him to send the child home. But the child suddenly pleaded with his majesty to give him a chance, to trade his life for Princess Tanya's. The emperor retorted, asking why his daughter would want to take a lowly life like his. Nox promised he would become Princess Tanya's shadow. Shadows like him would do anything for their master, and if the order was to die, they would do so without hesitation. Rahim knew a shadow was far more useful than any ordinary knight. The emperor realized his daughter had tamed quite an interesting thing, but the chancellor warned against trusting the child. His majesty thought so too. Just then, Nox conjured a dagger from his shadow and held it to his own throat. If the adults truly believed he would harm the princess, they could have killed him on the spot. He began to swear to the emperor that he wouldn't let his majesty regret his decision. But Rahim told the child that his life now belonged to Tanya, so he'd better not even think about handing her over to anyone else. Nox promised to prove his loyalty. The emperor suddenly recalled the Tower Lord's words. The three guardians would now protect Princess Tanya. Her Highness would live her own destiny as she pleased and ultimately bring glory to the Aztec family. The emperor ordered Dio Carmelia to send the boy to the northern territories. The Marquis froze, asking his majesty, "Do you mean that northern territories?" The emperor retorted, "Don't they always need troops there? Plus, with all those shadows, Karl Shalos will love it." The north is where the first imperial knights were founded. It was said that King Eccles overthrew a dragon there long ago, which was perhaps why the monster invasions never ceased. Although the boy was called a shadow, sending a small child there was basically a death sentence. But Nox calmly asked, "What exactly do I need to do there?" The emperor ordered him to fight until his body collapsed, to prove his worth through action and earn his place. That fool, having his life saved by the princess. She specifically asked for a safe place for Nox, so he wouldn't be bullied when he returned. But he chose a different path. Now, the boy was starting to think that even the dead were better off than him. Nox's mind suddenly filled with images of the princess's smile, a warm smile tugging at his lips. The sweetness of the candy the princess gave him still lingered in his mouth. Tanya suddenly woke up as her divine bead glowed and vibrated. She bolted upright in bed. The room was empty, so Tanya had no idea why the bead was reacting this way. Tanya suddenly heard rustling, realizing someone was there after all. She had been poisoned once before, so a would-be assassin showing up wasn't exactly earth-shattering. The Tower Lord had set up multiple barriers, yet someone still managed to slip in. Nox knocked softly on the door, calling for the princess. Tanya immediately recognized the clear, pleasant voice. She blinked in confusion, admitting she thought a professional killer had come in the middle of the night. Nox found her adorable. Tanya thought that Uncle Dio hadn't given her friend a safe place after all. But the boy said Mr. Dio had given him a chance and had done his best. Tanya still didn't understand why the boy had come to find her. She walked towards the door handle, and Nox found this adorable too. It turned out this adorable child also had a lovely laugh. Nox told her not to open the door, as he couldn't stay long, but he had something to say before he left. Tanya was confused and asked him what he meant. The boy's face flushed red, but he told the princess that she was much more radiant than him. Tanya's cheeks flushed instantly. She hadn't expected to hear such words and opened the door. but the hallway was empty, and the princess thought it was just a dream. After successfully capturing her father's attention, Rahim began appearing before Tanya, as she wished. And today, Tanya finally saw him. She hoped he would give her a surprise quest today. But nothing happened. Although the emperor would appear regularly, he was still cold towards his daughter. Rahim switched between love and hate in his attitude toward his child. She asked Nars why her father wouldn't talk to her, and he replied that his majesty was very busy. Tanya buried her head in her book. Exhausted. Deep down, she had cleared all the levels and completed all the quests. But this small body wasn't even allowed to leave the palace. But she wasn't going to give up. She had to find the Empress as soon as possible. Tanya finished her lessons, so she asked the Chancellor if she could play outside the palace. Nars warned her that it was very dangerous outside the Crystal Palace. His Majesty wanted his daughter safe, and for now, the palace was the only safe place in the empire. But then he took out a piece of chalk, and Tanya immediately perked up. Nars swore that when the princess grew to this height, he would persuade his Majesty to take her to see everything outside the palace. The little darling jumped down from her chair and rushed to the wall. She considered herself quite tall already. Tanya tried to see if she could reach it, but Nars just smiled and shook his head. So Tanya stood on her tiptoes and asked again. She looked so adorable, but the man said she still needed to grow about 2 handspans taller. Tanya didn't understand Nars's reaction. She was facing an emergency. The Chancellor told the princess to eat well, not be picky, and sleep well, and she would grow taller in a few nights. Then, he showed her how much more the princess needed to grow to reach her goal. Although Tanya felt a little ashamed, she knew she needed to act cute now. Tanya puffed out her cheeks and said, "I'm just short, but I'm already grown up." Nars admitted that he, too, had longed to grow up quickly when he was a child. As expected, this guy was tough to deal with. It would take another year to use deep influence. Therefore, Tanya decided to switch targets and go directly to her nanny. Gina suggested playing hide-and-seek with her highness, and the princess was waiting for those very words. The nanny told the princess to hide first, and she would count to 10. The princess had been playing hide-and-seek with Gina for a while now, but for Tanya, hide-and-seek was the perfect cover to explore the palace, just like playing a game. As soon as the nanny started counting, Tanya dashed off. For days, she had been playing hide-and-seek, sneaking around and planning her routes in her mind. Finally, she found a small crack in a corner of the Crystal Palace garden. She could finally see the world outside the walls. The princess successfully slipped out of the Crystal Palace. Time was running out, but the princess's first mission location was in the palace next door. But the knights suddenly noticed something. As soon as they asked, "Who's there?" Tanya froze. The soldiers were too alert. She had to think of something quickly or she risked being caught. So she immediately pulled out her diary. The princess flipped to the invisibility skill page. This ability could only be used once a day. Although it was expensive, saving money was pointless now. She needed it immediately. She purchased and activated the ability on the spot. As the knights suddenly appeared in front of her, the princess covered her mouth with her hand. One swore he felt something, while the other guessed it was a small bird. They decided to check the other side. This was more exciting than Tanya had anticipated, but there was no time to play. She had to finish her reconnaissance and return before her nanny noticed anything unusual. Tanya saw a luxurious palace before her eyes. It was then that she realized the Empress might be here. The princess guessed that the Emperor probably gave this magnificent palace to his most beloved woman. Tanya started searching for her mother in every room, but finding her wasn't easy. The palace was enormous, and it was easy to get lost inside. Plus, her invisibility was about to wear off, so she had to prepare to leave. Suddenly, she saw her father and Neris. Neris was reporting to him about the strange movements of the Western Lords. Rahim was convinced those insects were plotting something again. The princess didn't understand why the emperor was here. Wait, could she have come to the main palace? Tanya spotted a half-open door. She immediately slipped inside to hide, but she didn't expect the emperor to follow her into the same room. The princess panicked. Her invisibility was about to disappear. Neris warned his majesty that if they didn't meet the other party's demands, a battle might break out. The emperor coldly asked, "When have I ever been merciful to these pests?" The matter was simple. The emperor just needed to wait for the arrival of a Western Lord's daughter. Rahim coldly retorted that it was pure nonsense. The princess realized that if they caught her now, she was dead. Since she was in the Emperor's palace, Tanya had to hold on as long as possible without being discovered. Thinking this, the little one immediately sneezed. This was it. She was definitely exposed. The princess felt the curtain behind her begin to move. She turned her head and saw the shocked faces of the Emperor and his chancellor. They had no idea how the princess got here. Tanya decided that if she wanted to survive, she had to keep smiling. Rahim picked up the child and asked how she got here. But the princess put a finger to his lips, telling him to be quiet. She explained that she was playing hide-and-seek and had to win, which meant her nanny couldn't find her. Tanya found it difficult to continue answering. Suddenly, the child sneezed again. The king froze, anxiously asking why his only daughter was so hot. After a night of hide-and-seek, the princess finally lay in bed. Tanya hadn't slept all night and was too tired to move the next day. From using so many different skills, her small body was completely drained. In fact, if it weren't for the daily limit, she could have used these skills several times a day. Tanya knew that the more she used her skills, the more tired she would become, but she didn't expect it to accumulate to this extent. At least there was no instant death setting in the game. So even though she used a lot of skills, everything was still okay. The Emperor asked sharply, "Why isn't Tanya up yet?" The doctor hesitated. "Well, Your Majesty, I think the princess is just overexerted. But that's all I can say." Rahim blurted out, "How can you be sure it's just overexertion?" The princess silently prayed in her heart that her father would stop troubling the innocent doctor. Then, Tanya apologized to her nanny in her heart for being caught while hiding during their game. The Emperor suddenly asked, "What if the princess is also cursed?" Tanya realized this couldn't go on. Her father was about to lose control and kill someone. Raymond's roar abruptly ceased when Tanya suddenly called out his name. The moment he realized she was awake, he rushed to her bedside. Tanya told her father that she wasn't cursed. She remembered there was no setting in the game where someone died suddenly from a curse, but the expressionless face the NPC had made bothered her. Tanya started coughing violently again. Then she pleaded with him to stop being angry. For some reason, Tanya felt utterly exhausted, as if she couldn't hold on any longer. As Tanya's eyelids began to droop, the Emperor's eyes widened. Trapped in an empty space, Tanya heard a voice calling her name. She knew exactly who the voice belonged to. That sweet, gentle voice, as sweet as rice cake, could only belong to her mother, the Empress. When she saw the Empress standing there, she bolted upright. She couldn't believe her mother was actually here. Tanya lunged forward and hugged her with all her might. Tears welled up in her eyes, and the little girl whispered, "Why did you wait so long to come see me?" It had been too cruel for Tanya to be alone with her hot-tempered father. Cesara remained silent, and Tanya's heart sank. It was just a dream. Since it was a dream, the princess figured she might as well tell the Empress all the cool things that had happened to her. She started with the moment she received the divine bead. Then Tanya gushed about her new tutor, Nasha, who had already taught her so much. It was frustrating sometimes, but the payoff was always worth it. During lessons, she would wonder if it was all too intense for a child her age, but hey, she was keeping up pretty well. She had just met a super cute boy from a faraway kingdom named Nox, and they got along really well. But now he had gone somewhere else. When Nox left, he told her she was breathtakingly beautiful, his eyes practically sparkling like the galaxy. Yeah, it was a bit bold, but still sweet. Hearing something like that from a handsome boy felt definitely different. She promised to only tell her mother and begged her to keep it secret. Cesara suddenly interrupted, "Darling, you have to go now." Tanya blinked. "Wait, can't we stay a little longer? It's been so long." Even though it was a dream, she was smiling brightly. Then her mother casually said, "Your father has been waiting for you." The princess didn't think that cold-hearted jerk would care about something like that. Cesara kissed her beloved daughter's forehead and told her, "Mommy and Daddy will always love you. Raymond is just afraid of many things." The woman's figure began to dissipate into the air, making a final request for her daughter to always be on her father's side. Tanya tried to stop her. She still had so much to say, but it was no use. The little girl abruptly woke up from her sleep. Realizing this, her eyes filled with tears. But to her surprise, she saw the Emperor standing by her side with his arms crossed, gazing intently at her. Tanya couldn't believe her father had actually been waiting for her. The man immediately asked her how she was feeling, and the little girl said she was fine now and full of energy. Raymond breathed a sigh of relief. Tanya couldn't believe it. Had His Majesty been watching over his sick daughter this whole time? This shocked the princess, who had always assumed her father hated her. The Emperor suddenly revealed that Cesara had begged him to protect their daughter and allow her to grow up healthy. But even that I couldn't do. The man stood up and reached out to his daughter, but he abruptly withdrew his hand, muttering that he had almost made a terrible mistake. Now Tanya understood. Her father was afraid that if he showed her affection, the curse would befall her just as it had her mother. Raymond said that since he had confirmed she was all right, he could go back to work, and then called for a nurse before leaving. Tanya couldn't just let it go, so she shouted out that she had seen her mother in her dream today. The man stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes widening in shock. Tanya told him that her mother was in a glass box and said she missed him and Tanya very much. But Raymond firmly stated that wasn't her mother. Sasara only missed her daughter, and he would definitely bring the real her back. Tanya didn't understand why her stubborn father wouldn't believe her. The emperor suddenly asked, "Don't you trust your father?" The little princess thought his tone was strange, but she still replied, "I do, father." Raymond gave her a warm smile, thanking her for her words. After that severe episode of collapse, Tanya had to recuperate in bed for a while. The royal chef's potato soup was absolutely divine. It was frustrating, but Tanya couldn't do anything about it. Her emperor father was just concerned about her. She suddenly remembered the boy she had seen when she first woke up after collapsing. A familiar voice urged Mimuli to take the princess to rest. The child obeyed and used his magic. Tanya felt comfortable. She opened her eyes. She guessed this must be the student Uncle Ihold had mentioned last time. She couldn't recall his face now, but he looked young. Tanya didn't have high expectations. Uncle Ihold had said his student was only a first-order mage. But, judging by the sensation just now, this child had great potential. Investing in him was a sure win. She could essentially gain an assistant for free. This was the ancient secret to improving efficiency. Without a second thought, Tanya decided to nurture this mage.